On this week's Lewis on the Law, I have yet another great show for you. That's right, we're going to talk due diligence in the real estate process. I have attorney Sasan Nemat on with me, and we're about to get diligent. You are listening to Lewis on the Law. My name is James Lewis, and I'm your host this week and every week. And I have yet another great, exciting, and informative show for you. I have attorney Sasan Nemat on with me from the Nemat Law Firm. Can you pronounce your last name? Because I'd butcher that if I tried.
Sure, that's okay. Well, it's great to be here again. James, I really appreciate the invitation and to be a part of this show and talk to your listeners at Business 1190 Wall Street Business Network. My name is Sasan Nemat. I go short by Nemat, so folks can pronounce it better. I'm an attorney at law, mediator, also a rural developer.
Rural developer, I love that title. That's something that's really cool. You don't see many of those these days.
Well, it just, life happened, and I ran with it. And just, the opportunity sort of presented itself, and look at, where we are at today, and just it's a fruit of that.
Yeah, so Sasan has a couple of businesses going, Nemat Law Firm and Emperor Real Estate. So do you guys do a lot of rural development? Is that what's going on with you guys?
Well, it's actually a sort of one location, one site development. So it's not as big as perhaps, some of the REITs you would see or some of the bigger pocketed developments. I'm specifically focused on this one site right on top. It's right on Joe Frank Harris Parkway, right on Highway 41. In the beautiful city of Cartersville. So it's what used to be a multifamily, and right now it's third releasing up for construction of retail.
Oh, okay. That's awesome. And you guys already have your tenants in stock and everything?
Well, we're working on it. And if you're hearing this show and you want to be out in the beautiful Cartersville, well, a great spot on Highway 41. But we're working on it. At this point in time, we're sure that retail mixed use is where we're at. And we're working with different tenants, making sure that it's the right mix for both parties.
Okay, sounds great. So this show today is on the due diligence process in real estate buying. And Sasan, what are we talking about when we talk about the due diligence process?
Well, James, due diligence process is perhaps the most important part of being involved in the real estate game. What you want to do is avoid making mistakes. Mistakes are part of the game. Anybody and everybody would make those mistakes. But what you want to do is avoid making mistakes that really would cost you plenty, meaning you won't survive the game throughout the cycles that are involved.
Okay, so when you talk about the cycles that are involved, what are you talking about?
Sure. So real estate goes in cycles. It's however you want to look at it. It's a WV, however you want to look at it. But it goes from a seller's market to a buyer's market in within span of what historically has been 7 to 8 years. So it typically fluctuates through that. And I think if anybody who's old enough would remember the 2008 meltdown and the sort of recovery after that. So it's just part of how the structure of the economy in real estate is. It's important to know, or at least estimate and be intuitive about where and what part of the cycle we are in, so that whatever decision you want to make, you make it informed and you play out the cycle in your favor rather than against you.
Okay, so this is a really important question. What part of the cycle are we in right now?
James, that's a tough question, and I don't think anybody would be able to answer you. Nobody really has a crystal ball. I think you just have to sort of look into the macroeconomy as a whole, look into your local economy. Real estate is a very locally driven market. So let's say, where I'm at in Cartersville, Georgia would be a little different than perhaps, where we're sitting here in your studio in Buckhead, Georgia. So it just have to follow the global national trends, local trends, and make sure that, the product, whatever it is that you're doing, has the demand for it, supply meeting demand, just, economics 101. So it's tough to say, but it's just you have to look at the indicators.
Okay, now, so what types of indicators, what types of factors actually influence these cycles?
Sure. So a lot of these cycles, again, are driven by supply demand, interest rates, what's going on in, overseas with capital markets, what's going on here with capital markets. Real estate is not the only investment that folks can make. So it goes in tangent with other investment types. And it's just, this sort of bigger picture of what's the expected sort of return in this in the real estate market and what you can get elsewhere, and what's the sort of risk factor associated with it.
Okay, so now when we're talking due diligence, this really applies to acquisition, right? Like I do some site acquisition, so I know a little bit about this process. But is that what we're talking about here, due diligence before the acquisition process?
Yes, that would be mostly what we're discussing here. However, due diligence is not just something that you would do prior to an acquisition or while you're in the middle of the acquisition. It's just something that you just have to, as part of this industry, you just have to have your ears sharp and eyes ready to look at the finer details.
Okay, so what are the objectives to due diligence? Let's go ahead and start there. Like,
Sure.
what are you talking about when you say objectives to due diligence?
Sure. So the objective is, dependent on who the actor is and what the purpose is. So the objective of real estate due diligence is to make sure that whatever you're, ending up with is going to cash flow every month. It's going to build you wealth. It's going to satisfy all the obligations that it has. That's, the bottom line of it. That's why you're getting into the real estate game, because you want to create wealth, because you want to make a better life for your family or yourself. So that's the aim. The chief aim is to make sure that all those sort of finer details are seen. So depending on what side of the table you're on, you would approach it from a different angle. So let's say if you're an investor, that's a little different to you than to someone who's about to run a restaurant, owner-occupied sort of business in a physical location. And that's also different than, if you're running an apartment complex. So it's all, dependent on the asset class. Are you running a retail? Are you doing multifamily? And so on and so forth. So it really depends on all those details. But the bottom line is we want to see what the seller is not telling you. The story that has been hidden, that's the part that, at the time of acquisition is the time to realize all of those sort of hidden pictures because you make your money when you buy. It's not, the time that you sell a piece of real estate, that's the time you get paid. But you already made your money when you did the acquisition. So that's why it's very important to make sure, all the things are seen.
Okay, so you brought up something really important there. So you're talking about getting to the story that the seller is not telling you. How do you do that?
So there's a process into it. There's a process that savvy investors and savvy real estate professionals are aware of it. And the folks that are coming into the market, first-time buyers, they really need to be aware of the things that make or break a deal. And what are those things that they need to really pay closer attention to. So let's say when you buy a commercial real estate, let's simplify it. You're buying, it's not even just commercial real estate, any sort of real estate. You're buying a physical space. You're buying a physical asset. At the same time, though, you're buying intangible properties that are associated with this physical space. So a lot of times with commercial real estate, the streams of income are what you're really buying because you're buying a certain expected cash flow. That's what you're buying. So you're investing a whole bunch of money to make sure that you get, a certain appreciation, certain cash flow. So those are the things that throughout the process of your due diligence, you really need to dig to find out everything about it.
Yeah, we all want that ROI, the return on investment.
That's right.
That's the big thing there. So when you're looking at this, you're looking at the basic income stream from the property. What other type of other factors are you taking in? I guess you're taking in the physical location of the property, of course, income streams from the property, maybe the potential for the property.
Correct. So you're looking at all those factors that you just mentioned, and you're looking at everything and anything else that is really relevant to the case. First, you want to figure out what it is that you want to do with this piece of real estate. What's your plan for it? What's your exit strategy? You need to know that prior to going into this deal. You need to know how long you're expecting to hold your money, hold the investor's money, sort of occupied in the space, and what's the sort of exit strategy that you're looking at. You need to look at just, everything from the legal standpoint of zoning, encumbrances on the piece of real estate, easements, restrictions on the land, anything that impacts your exit strategy, meaning. So let's say if your exit, like, it was for me, is to develop the underlying land underneath a piece of real estate, then your developable land is really what you're looking to buy. So if there are easements going through it, if there hills and topography that is really not favorable to you. Those are things that you want to look at. So again, you're looking at everything. The trick of due diligence is to be willing to let go of your due diligence cost. So the amount of money that you pay to the attorney, so on and so forth, be ready to walk away from it if it's necessary. Don't marry the deal.
Yeah, I think that's really good. Be prepared to walk away from the deal. It's the only way you have any control over the deal. Now, you said a whole bunch in there. You brought up things from compliance obligations to financing to the property itself. We're going to circle back around that, but we're at near the end of this break, so I want to give you a little bit of a little chance to introduce or to talk about yourself, your practice, and give yourself a little bit of, or give our listeners a little information on how to get in touch with you.
Thank you, James. So the name of my law firm is Nemat Law Firm. That's NEMAT lawfirm.com. My number is 770-285-8008. What we do at my law firm is we help folks to navigate through the complexities of real estate market, mostly commercial real estate as well as residential real estate as well as we help foreign folks that are interested in coming to the United States with EB-5 investment job-based immigration, which a lot of those capital end up in real estate.
You're listening to Lewis on the Law. We've got a lot to go through in this show because due diligence is a heavy topic. We'll be back in a minute. You are listening to Lewis on the Law. My name is James Lewis, and I am here with you this week and every single week to empower you, the listener, with legal information. This show is not designed to replace the advice of an attorney. If you have a serious legal issue, you need to go ahead and contract with an attorney. You can always contact me, and I have a bunch of attorneys that I'm in contact with. I may be able to help you with your issue. Believe it or not, I am an attorney, so I know some of you guys are going to find that a little bit of surprising, especially those people who knew me in my 20s. They're going to be like, what? How did that happen? No. Anyways, I have an awesome show for you. I'm on with attorney Sasan Nemat, and we are talking real estate due diligence. Now, Sasan, give them some contact information for you real quickly before we get back into this subject.
Sure. You can reach me at 770-285-8008 and nematlawfirm.com.
Okay, so when we last left, we were talking about a lot of the fundamentals of the due diligence process, the purchase, and when we do this type of stuff, usually there's a team involved. Now, as a person who's going out there and taking their first steps, are you talking about team building at all?
Oh, yes, most definitely. So real estate is a very relationship-based business. It's a sort of, one of those old school businesses where you got to shake hands and shake as many hands as you can and be authentic in your relationships and deliver what you promise. So it's, one of those old school businesses. And that's, the sort of businesses that I like personally. But you need a whole roster of, folks, professionals in your team, and you're the quarterback of this team. Your team should involve of course, an attorney. You can't not have an attorney. But you need investors, folks that want to invest in your dream, in your idea.
Yeah, believe it or not, actually all real estate transactions in Georgia have to go through attorneys. We kind of have the lock on the system.
That's right. And then, here's the thing. Attorneys see it from a different angle. So a lot of times attorneys can see those details and have been through the process many times and have seen those things that have gone wrong that most people say, oh, that would never happen. And it does. And then, some folks end up paying the price for it. But you need lenders, you need brokers, you need surveyors, you need appraisers, environmental engineers, general contractors, property managers, accountants, and so many more. So this is it's a very team-based business to be in. You can't do it just by yourself.
Okay. Now, I liked what you said at the end of the last segment. You said basically get ready to walk away from the deal because me and my wife, we actually bought a couple of houses here in the Decatur area, and my wife tends to fall in love with the property. So and it becomes like pulling a child away from an ice cream cone. But you say that's the key, right?
That is the key, and that's very normal for folks to really get involved with it, because here's the thing: you look at different pieces of real estate for many months. You come across this one thing that seems like a good deal. You go under contract, and you spend money, time, and it just becomes harder and harder to pull away and pull the plug. But that's just part of the game. You need to always be prepared to do that when it's necessary. And that last thing you want to do is to go into a bad deal because you were just frustrated to go and do this process all over again. And what you really need to do is build enough, a strong network, good enough people around you, the team that we were just discussing, that these deals come to you. I'm not saying left and right, but in more quantities, so that you don't really get attached to any one single specific piece of address.
Yeah, don't get attached to a piece of ground. Okay, so when you're talking about due diligence, we're talking about really, I mean, us as property lawyers, we're really talking about the ground. So I think that a good starting point is actually physically going to the property. There's some people who buy properties sight unseen.
Oh yes, and a lot of out-of-state folks are actually doing it in Atlanta because of the rising markets. And if you bring in West Coast capital or up North capital, it goes far. So you just tend to be a little, and you're far away, so you tend to just sort of skip the process. But for me personally, again, I'm old school. I like to walk the property. I like to always recommend folks to walk the property, because at the end of the day, if you don't really get out there to see the neighborhood, to see what's going on around there at different times, when it's sunny, when it's rainy, at different times of the day, different days, you don't really see the full picture of what you're really buying. So you need to definitely get out there and look at this piece of real estate multiple times at multiple conditions that you would see.
Okay, so when you're talking about the due diligence process, let's talk about some of the actual instruments used to create this process. I mean, I'm talking about, the LOIs. I'm going to get into the alphabet game. The real estate attorneys know LOIs, PSAs. So can you get into that a little bit?
Sure. So the way you sort of tie up a piece of real estate is through contracts, through legal mechanisms to create binding agreements between both parties. So you just mentioned the sort of perfect one, LOI. That's a letter of intent. It can be binding, it can be non-binding, but that's a really great way, especially when you're dealing in context of commercial real estate, where contracts and PSA, purchase and sale agreements, tend to be very lengthy. The LOI is sort of that handshake with a little bit of a spin on it, where both parties are actually taking the time to memorize what's been discussed into sort of terms of agreement that can later on go to that PSA, the purchase and sale agreement. But there are other instruments of trade that you need to sort of engage in. Those are confidentiality agreement, depending on, again, if you're, let's say, discussing things with different tenants, non-competes, if you're trying to raise money from folks that may end up going chasing the same deals. But the PSA, the purchase sale agreement, and letter of intent are sort of the Bibles and the master plan.
Okay, now I don't want to bring up a can of worms, because this can get it. I mean, it can become a complicated subject. But when does a letter of intent become binding?
So that's exactly as you said it. That's a can of worms that can become sort of a very complex conversation. I would say it's very, again, the language that people put in there, and just a lot of different details that it's just unfortunately hard to just generalize.
Yeah, definitely comes with an offer and an acceptance. So be careful on the offers, and be careful on what you're accepting and how you're accepting it. Okay, so let's talk a little bit about residential real estate, because I think this applies to almost most people. As a first step to acquisition of wealth is buying your own home. I mean, that's really a first step process. I mean, if you're young and you're trying to take those steps into actually building real net wealth, owning your own home is really important to this process.
Absolutely, and that's I believe that's the first step, as you said, into building wealth, and that's having your own home. Home ownership is just the core of the American dream. So to me, that's definitely the sort of first start. However, I think the listeners that at this network need to also be aware that your personal home, where you're sort of paying mortgage on it, it's not really a true investment in the sense of what investment is supposed to be, which is a return on your capital. So although you're building equity in the, hopefully, it's not exactly an investment. It's your, especially in today's Atlanta market, you're going to save a little bit of money on rent if you own. and other sort of beautiful things that come with home ownership. But a true investment is when you invest $1 in it and you expect certain percentage or whatever it is that becomes a return off of that.
Okay. So are you saying that you don't think that that a personal home is a good investment?
I think you can look at it from different angles. It can be an investment, but if you, let's say, buy into a single family home of at the peak of the market at $500,000, and then just all of a sudden the market drops and you're dealing with delinquent HOAs and this and that, and you are occupying the home, and you're not really cash flowing from it. There's no income that is coming from it. Then I personally don't see that as an investment. I see that more of a liability because it just, depending on which side of the market you're in, things can flip. And there are other folks that think the same way as I do. Naming one, that would be Warren Buffett. That's also says your personal home don't really count it as an investment, although you can really build great amount of equity if you buy at the right time with the right conditions.
So it really depends on what we talked about earlier, this cycle, what part of the cycle that you're entering this ball game in.
Exactly.
Okay, so let's talk about residential real estate as a real investor. You see them on TV all the time, the flip and flopper guys. I mean, they make it look so cool. They take like a $50,000 house, put $30,000 in it, and sell it for like $150,000, right?
Oh yeah,
that's all there is to the game, right?
Well, so the funny thing is, that's the sort of general picture. But then when you go in and actually try to do one by one, you're like, oh wow, every case is different, different story. But what you want to really look at as someone who's trying to make an investment out of a single family home, and there are really big corporations and venture capitalists that are doing that. And gulping up thousands and a lot of different single family homes in different locations, is the after repair value. So you want to buy in at a percentage that gives you enough cushion in the deal that your acquisition cost plus a certain construction cost comes up to be hopefully living is 30%, 25% within the margin of your after repair value. So that is the profit that you're making. And then also what you gotta do is, like you said, go walk the property. Whether it's a home you want to occupy or it's a home you want to flip, have an inspector to come out there. Have a general contractor to come out and give you an estimate on what the inspector has said. Have an appraisal that is done that says, all right, well, this is what is worth today. This is what you will be. It will be worth after you do what you're planning on doing on in terms of just the repairs and so on and so forth. So it's similar to what needs to be done in terms of, you have to be diligent, but perhaps not as complex as when, in the context of commercial real estate.
Okay, we're almost at the end of this segment. We've got a lot to cover in this show. When we get back, we're going to talk about commercial real estate. Sasan, give them some contact information for you once again.
Sure. This is, again, Sasan Nemat of Nemat Law Firm. You can reach me at 770-285-8008 and nematlawfirm.com.
You're listening to Lewis on the Law. My name is James Lewis. We've got a lot of stuff to go through. We're talking about the due diligence process in real estate acquisition, or just the real estate process in general. I've got a lot more right after these messages. You are listening to Lewis on the Law. My name is James Lewis, and I have yet another fun-filled and exciting and informative show. Who knew the law could be so exciting? That's right. We're talking about the due diligence process in real estate. And when we last left off, we were talking about residential. We're about to get into commercial, but I just want to let you, the listener, know that if you have a legal issue that you need to know something about, go ahead and go to my website, jameslewislegal.com, and send me a message, and I will try and get an attorney who actually knows something about your topic, or maybe I know something about your topic, and we will talk about your topic on air. This show is not meant to replace the advice of an attorney. If you have a serious legal issue, you need to go ahead and contract with an attorney. This show is designed to give you legal information. It's designed to be your first step in the legal process. Eventually, all my shows will be archived on my website. All of them to date are. And eventually, almost every single legal topic that you can think of, you'll be able to go to my website and access your legal topic and get your introduction into what type of attorney you're looking for, what are the issues you need to pay attention to. And today, we're paying attention to the issues surrounding due diligence process in real estate. So we talked a lot about residential just a minute ago, and we kind of bridged into commercial with the flip or flop type of talk, because we're always talking about, when you're talking about this, you're talking about making money. So let's talk about profit.
Sure. And there's so much to cover that it's just it's sort of hard to go through all of this within the time frame that we have. So definitely, as you said, this is not to replace the advice of an attorney. On commercial real estate, what we talked about was what you're buying is a physical structure with the intangible properties associated with it, meaning that mostly the stream of income that you're buying. So how do you really calculate that stream of income, and how are these properties really evaluated based on just the price tag of them? So there's one, NOI, net operating income, which is, the sort of what is most talked about. Let's talk about what really that entails. That is the total revenues that you bring in minus the gross operating expenses that you have. So what is the total revenue? That is the amount, let's say, what you can bring in as far as your leases are concerned, rents are concerned, factor in what the vacancies could be. So you need to also always factor in vacancies. Nothing is going to be 100% all the time. You're going to have vacancies, you're going to have evictions, you're going to have all sorts of everything that happens as you're having rental income coming in. You also have some ancillary income that comes into place, meaning, let's say if you have a laundry room, if there are, ways that you can collect a low bit of payment, parking fees, this and that, things that are not necessarily rent, but are as part of, this bundle of services that you offer, you sort of collect on. As far as your expenses are concerned, you're looking at operation costs, management fees, utilities, accounting, legal, and all sorts of stuff like that. What's not included in this NOI calculation are the property taxes, are not, the depreciation, tenant improvements, capital expenditures, and just the debt service itself. So those are not part of NOI. And that's important to know, because when we come into discussing property valuations, how you calculate NOI and your eyes and ears, and making sure that nothing that is not supposed to be there isn't really there to sort of fool you around and fool around with the numbers is very key. So you need to be 100% sure and very familiar with these what needs to be in NOI. And if there is something that is missing, that's money that might be coming out of your pocket. So you just have to be sure that everything is calculated in.
Okay, so you're really talking about asset valuation here, or the steps in asset valuation. So what are we talking about when we talk about asset valuation?
Sure, that's a great question. So asset evaluation, you got to compare apples to apples. So what the market has done is a cap rate for, to try to figure out what's an apple and compare it to an apple.
Okay, wait a minute. Let's slow this down, because a lot of people don't know what a cap rate is. What is a cap rate?
Sure. Cap rate is short for capitalization rate. That is the rate on top of the sort of risk-free treasury bond that you can get. So let's say, if the treasury bond at this point in time gives you 3%, that's risk-free. You're sure that, the United States government is not going to default on it. You get your money back. But if you want to go to the free market, you're taking additional risk. So capitalization rate considers that additional risk on top of that, sort of risk-free environment. So if you go into, let's say, what's known as a Class A, real estate markets, commercial real estate go into Class A, Class B, Class C, Class D, and they have minus and plus. So you can have an A plus, you can have a D minus. Also, the local area that you're in is also categorized as A, B, C, D. So you want to, be sure of this property itself, what exactly, what class asset it is, as well as, the area that it sits on. So both of those are very important. But the capitalization rate itself is calculated by the net operating income, the NOI that we just discussed, over value. So that's how you come up with. So the lower the capitalization rate, meaning the lower return that the investor is expecting. So the nicer properties, let's say, if you're, around here, Class A office space around Buckhead is at a lower cap rate than you would find Class, D somewhere in the D area.
Okay, so are you saying that they'll expect more of return on their investment in the Class D area, or are you saying they'll expect more of it here in Buckhead?
You would expect more as the class asset and the location gets tougher to manage, becomes harder to deal with.
Because it's a greater credit risk.
It's much greater credit risk. It's much greater default rates. It's much greater of everything. So, the diversity of the tenants, just, the broader supply and demand of the market, age of the property, credit worthiness of the tenants, as you said. And all of those little factors come in to say, all right, well, this market has a cap of this, and there's really no way of knowing exactly what the cap is. It's just best way to find it out is by looking at historical data, talking to lots of brokers, and just comparing apples to apples. So what you need to find is comparable properties, so you can compare that to what you're looking at, so you can sort of be sure that you're buying something at the right cap. And caps change with market. So market can go up, market can go down, and the cap rates would change based on that.
Okay, so you said a lot of important things there. Historical data, I think that's really important. Walking the property and talking to brokers, those are important elements in this.
Absolutely.
Okay, so the age of the property, a lot of these elements, a lot of times when you talk about tenants, people think, you're renting a property, you're buying a property for rental, but this applies to if you're buying a commercial, a strip mall.
Absolutely. It's the process itself is not really different. The complexity in residential and commercial real estate is different. At the end of the day, whatever you end up buying, you want to get a free and clear title. You want to make sure that whatever you buy doesn't have any environmental issues. You want to make sure that, the income that you're promised to get is what you actually end up getting. You want to make sure that you buy into the right cycle, so you end up waving the cycle up rather than the cycle bringing you down. So it's just, the game doesn't change. It's just how you play it that is a little different based on if you're, trading farmlands to single family homes to office and retail.
Yeah. There's a lot of factors involved in trading farmlands. So environmental issues, that's an interesting subject because it ties into compliance and some of the issues that are hidden that the seller may not actually let you know about.
Exactly, and that's why having an environmental engineer that can really help you and go in between the lines is very important. I would say always, especially when you look at, the broader area and you see gas stations and dry cleaners and so on and so forth, always it's worth the money to get a phase 1 environmental study done. If you're financing the piece of real estate, your lender would require you to get that done because they don't want to put their money where it may have environmental contaminations. And as you know,
they don't want to invest into a brownfield.
There we go. Yes, and as you know, the Georgia state agencies as well, the federal EPA are not really kind and nice about these sort of things. And once your name also goes on that chain of title, you're looking at joint and several liability for years to come. Meaning you could be the biggest pocket there, and for years to come, you may get targeted. So it's one of those sort of pieces of the due diligence that you got to be real careful of. If a seller tells you, hey, I got environmental phase 1 done just a year ago, why don't you use this copy instead of spending a couple of $1,000s on this professional? I would say do it anyways. And your interest is not necessarily parallel to the interest of the seller as a buyer.
Exactly, and this brings us back to part of the physical property inspection, which a lot of people just kind of gloss over. I guess they're not glossing. It depends on who the person is, because if you're buying a strip mall, you're not glossing this over. But if you're buying, say, townhomes to be your first step in the investment process, you may not take these factors into account.
Absolutely. And, again, it's a matter of what you're buying, and it's just a matter of making sure you go through that process and making sure that within your due diligence period, you've bought yourself enough time in the contract that you can actually do all of this. And perhaps, there's an extension clause in there that you can extend due diligence when it's necessary. Because once you start due diligence, days come in and go very fast. You may have to do a rezoning, this and that. And it's just, you don't want to end up with just a couple of days left, having to make a really important decision about thousands and, potentially millions of dollars in investment.
You're listening to Lewis on the Law. We have gotten into a lot of stuff. When we come back, we're going to kind of wrap up a little bit of what we're going through, and then we're going to go ahead and kind of recap the main points in a checklist here for you, because there's a lot to it. You're listening to Lewis on the Law. I am here with attorney Sasan Nemat talking about due diligence in the real estate process. You are listening to Lewis on the Law. My name is James Lewis. I am here with you this week and every week to talk about the law. That's right. Each week we bring you a different topic, a different attorney, and we get into a different aspect about the law that may affect you as an individual. And since this is business radio, the Wall Street Business Network, we're talking a little bit about real estate investment today and the due diligence process surrounding real estate. I have attorney Sasan Nemat on with me. Sasan, will you give them some contact information for you?
Sure. You can reach me at 770-285-8008 at nematlawfirm.com.
And you can always get in touch with me at jameslewislegal.com. You can give me a call at 404-616-01-0075, or you can email me at james@jameslewislegal.com. And we went through a lot of stuff, and you and I are kind of buried in this field almost every single day, so people could get lost in everything that we just said kind of throughout. So I kind of want to bring this into a kind of a nutshell. So when you're talking due diligence, what are you talking about?
Sure. So the goal of due diligence is to make sure that what you're buying is worth what you're buying, and you don't end up with more headache than the day before you purchased this piece of real estate. So that's the goal, to make sure the cash flow is what you're promised, and there are no issues that down the line you would end up paying big checks. So that's the goal. To achieve this goal, you need a whole bunch of team members to be able to get this done. And we discussed the sort of team members that you need, from attorneys, surveyors, environmental consultants, engineers, general contractors, appraisals, and so on and so forth. So you need a big team of folks that can help you navigate through this complex process. What you're really looking for, the checklist of what you're looking for, you need to make sure that what you're buying has clear and clean title. You need to make sure that your survey that you do indicates that what you're buying is exactly what was marketed to you. Meaning, if you were promised 5 acres of land, you are actually buying 5 acres of land. You need to make sure that survey matches that legal description. You need to make sure that zoning of what you're buying is exactly as what we're expecting, and there are no sort of government situations that come up down the line. You need to make sure that the cash flow, as we discussed, there is a sort of physical asset that you're buying, physical property with an address, but there are these intangible properties that you're buying. These intangible properties are these cash flow. The best way to go about it is you got to really, dig into the rent roll. Look at the leases. Make sure the leases match the rent roll. Get certificates from the tenants when it's necessary. Make sure security deposits are there. Making sure that the performers that have put in front of you, those net operating incomes, there's nothing really fishy about it. That what needs to be there is there. What isn't there, and if there's something missing, you need to be proactive, include that in your calculations to make sure that the performer that you're being told is actually, worth what you end up paying for. So it's, like you said, it's lots of details, lots of complexity, very difficult to sort of just wrap it up all in one shot. But and that's why these professionals, you need to have a team just bigger than you yourself.
And that was really good. And we've kind of mixed up commercial real estate and residential. So I just want to talk a little bit about the due diligence through the residential process. We kind of touched on the broad topics in the commercial process. So what about the residential process?
Sure. So the residential process is definitely more straightforward than the commercial process, but it's all the same. You need to, contact your insurer and make sure this house is is insurable. What you can find out at that point in time is this house sitting on a flood zone and so on and so forth. So these are a lot of things that you find out by having the right team and talking to them. You need to make sure the appraisal that you do comes up at or above what you're paying for in the free market. You need to have an inspection done. You need to, before you pay the inspector, you need to ask this inspector what really is being done. Is the roof being inspected? Or is the inspector inspecting for termites? So there's a lot of things that you need to also do when you contract your team, to just make sure that the team is doing what you were expecting or thinking was going to get done. Then the general contractor needs to walk the property with you to make sure that the items on the inspection are within your budget to get it fixed. If there's a homeowner association, you need to make sure that that homeowner association is solvent enough and is working in harmony. You need to talk to title folks to make sure that, again, the title is free and clear, very important. And just so many other things. And at the end of the day, you got to trust your gut feeling. When you're buying a home, you also need to, if you're, putting your family in there, you want to make sure certain other things, like if there are, sex offenders in the area and just school systems and those.
Crime is a big thing to make sure you have got a good handle on.
Most definitely. So those are the things that just by, factor in that there's a family now, your own family living in there. Those are a little heightened level of scrutiny that you want to pay attention and apply certain other mechanisms. But you just got to trust your gut feeling and do the best that you can, because once you close on it, it becomes a lot more difficult to deal with any headache that may come up.
Yeah, it does. So let's get back into commercial property now. So what about financing and insuring and property operations and management, all of that in the due diligence process?
Sure. So when it comes to financing, what we were discussing with rent rolls and so on and so forth is very important, because the financier is going to look at what's really coming in versus what the performance are. You need to have a good grasp on what's really taking place with this piece of real estate. As far as the other matters, you need to look at historical performance. So if this seller is promising a certain return to you, you need to look at the same class asset in the same class area. What are the historical rents that are being brought in on a daily basis? Because if you buy in on the expected sort of pro forma of $1,000 for one bedroom, and then you fail to look into the market and see, the very, very best that this market has brought in was $750, then you end up with a deficiency that is very hard to recoup. So again, it all goes down to numbers. It all goes down to the physical shape of the property and making sure everything matches as what is promised to you.
So when you're talking about historical performance, you're not only talking about historical performance about that specific piece of property, but also comparable properties.
Exactly. No, that's very important. Not only you want to look at that piece of real estate, how it's historically been performing, you also want to look at what this property is competing with, and whether this property really stacks up against other properties in the locality. Let's say if you're buying a multifamily, if other multifamilies in the same vicinity of areas have walk-in closets, have roofed parking, certain things, amenities, let's say swimming pool and this and that, and the piece of real estate that you're buying doesn't really have those, then you're not really your competition has a better deal than you have. So now, if the pro forma itself says you're gonna make above market rates, then you gotta think about that a little bit harder. Would I really, when the competition itself is offering more than what I could ever do? So those are the things that you want to look at, not just historical data of this property and what the projections are, but also what the competition is doing.
Okay, now does this take us to the closing process, the closing part? This is the part of the deal that everybody likes to get to.
Sure. So the closing, at the end of the day, with the closing itself, you want to trust but verify everything. The closing is the very end process, towards the end of the process. It's not really, it's right before you start with the asset management and portfolio management. But with the closing, you want to make sure that the closing docs are written right. You want to make sure the lender performs as they're supposed to. You want to make sure that the folks that have control over your escrow are folks that are trustworthy. Again, you're talking about, especially in commercial context, lots of money. So you need to be sure that you're dealing with folks that have your best interest in mind, and really treat you right, especially when it comes to the transfer of the money.
Well, in escrow holdings, I would think that you'd want an attorney doing the escrow holding, or at least an attorney-run escrow firm.
Absolutely, and I think it's very important to make sure. Again, that's part of the due diligence. You want to first start by doing the due diligence on your own team, and the folks that you're going to be employing as part of this process. Then you get into just a piece of real estate, the physical space itself. But the first and foremost is building your team, making sure your team is working for you, and also making sure that, again, you're not married to the deal. You're not married to any specific piece of address.
Okay, we're getting once again towards the end of our show. Now, Sasan, will you give them some contact information for you real quickly?
Sure. You can reach me at 770-285-8008. This is Sasan Nemat of Nemat Law Firm. I'm an attorney at law, mediator, and a rural developer with a business named Emperor Real Estate.
I love the rural developer thing. That is awesome. So you're listening to Lewis on the Law. My name is James Lewis, and I am your host this week and every week. You can contact me at jameslewislegal.com. You can email me at james@jameslewislegal.com, or you can give me a call at 404-601-0075. We have been through a lot. Sasan, thank you for being here. And, I forget this every single show, but I'm not today. I'd like to thank our producer, Sam Davis. He's sitting over here, and he does a great job each and every single week in bringing the show to you. Our multimedia producer, Anthony Cook. Once again, I'd like to thank you. For December, I have a great month of December coming up. We're going to get into the special interest areas of law. We're going to bring in Atlanta Legal. We're going to bring in Georgia Heirs Property Project, and we're going to bring in representatives from Lawyers for Equal Justice, a program that both Sasan and I were part of at one point in time. So it'll be a great month. Next week, I'm going to bring in a couple of attorneys from the Georgia Heirs Property Project. Now that's going to be a great show, and it kind of ties into the real estate that we're talking about right now. You're listening to Lewis on the Law. My name is James Lewis. Thanks a lot, guys.